Hello, I'm Professor McCoy, and today I want to continue talking about I, Jedi by Michael A. Stackpole, one of my favorite Star Wars EU novels, if not my absolute favorite. Um, and this time I want to talk about one of the more notorious elements of both this book and of Stackpole's Star Wars writing in general, um, which involves attraction and sexuality, let's say. Now, um, this is perhaps, let me put it this way. Stackpole is probably, at least by my reading experience, the horniest of the Star Wars EU authors, or at least he writes characters in a relatively horny sort of a way. Corran is particularly well known, and again perhaps notorious, for being very outspoken about his attractions to the various women, especially femme fatales that he encounters, and this book is no exception. Um, and this, of course, goes to even straightforwardly of his love and attraction to his wife, Mirax, who is the dashing smuggler type, just the very much a female Han Solo or Dash Rendar or any other kind of Corellian smuggler. And so it's Stackpole has a little bit of a reputation among a lot of Star Wars readers for being a bit over the top with these sorts of things and having it be somewhat perhaps even unnecessary in some places. However, I would push back on that because I do think that it absolutely contributes to the narrative and it absolutely contributes to some of Corran's personal character developments throughout the book, as well as giving us a really interesting ethical dilemma that we can explore. Okay, so we understand that as I've said before, the entire plot of this book, the main through line for all of this, is that Corran is trying to rescue his missing wife. He's trying to find her and save her from whatever kind of threat there is. And so I will say, be careful at this point if you have not read this yet. Just like with the last video, there's going to be spoilers here. So if you haven't read it yet and you would like to and you don't want to be spoiled on it, stop right here, read it, come back, and then we'll talk about it. Right? I mean, look, I'm a professor. I always say to do the readings before you come to class. Think of this as class, and there will be no problem. Anyway, he goes undercover in the second half of this book with a group of pirates, led by a former Imperial admiral, or at least self-styled admiral, named Leonia Tavira, who is a very, to use modern terminology perhaps, a very thirsty woman of an admiral. So she has a reputation for having basically a harem of young men at her, men in general, at her beck and call on her flagship, where Corran very strongly suspects where she is keeping Mirax prisoner, to draw out, it's, again, this is a complicated plot point, but essentially to draw out him and the Jedi in general for old revenge reasons, for someone she is working with, the group called the Jensari. It's a whole thing. In any case, he needs to get on board her flagship to her home base. As he's gone undercover, it comes to the point where she essentially offers him a place on her flagship as essentially one of her concubines. And Corran is faced with the ethical dilemma of, do I go along with this for long enough to find Mirax? Or would I be betraying her in order to help her? And can I do that? Is that the right thing to do? Is this the wrong thing to do? And he struggles with this because it seems to be an easy solution to a problem that might otherwise be insurmountable. And so eventually, he does come to a resolution of this, and he comes to the right decision, of course, because you gotta. But the journey along the way is an interesting one. And so we get a few little descriptions here. So first he starts to realize that he has a kind of base animal attraction to Tavira. First, he notices that he is jealous when she starts paying attention to one of his pirate squad mates. And then a little while later, he beats the living hell out of that guy, not just because of what he was doing. He was harassing civilians. He was harassing locals, basically. Corran beats the living hell out of him, specifically focusing on punching him in the face repeatedly, in part to ugly him up a little bit, so Tavira, the pirate captain, the admiral, won't be so attracted to him. She, of course, spots this immediately, and and that's basically when she gives him the offer instead. Now, of course, he describes this in the following way, as a sort of way of trying to excuse his attraction to his own mind. So he says the following. He says, "There was no denying that I was attracted to Tavira. It was a physical thing, an animal thing, a magnetic attraction of one meat machine to another. I wanted to think of it on that plane alone, as if I were betrayed by the crude matter that trapped my spirit. But I knew that wasn't the whole story either. There was something in her spirit that I found intriguing. I told myself that what drew me to her was situational. Still, I found something about Tavira absolutely fascinating. Made it difficult to deny the enticement of the flesh." So, this is Corran, first of all, being a bit of a Gnostic, which Star Wars has a tradition of being a bit Gnostic, of trying desperately to separate the flesh from the mind, or the body from the soul. But it winds up here, at least, completely denying that, right? And sort of reuniting mind and body. Because he does wind up admitting to himself that no, this really is a kind of attraction, and it really is disordered. It really is not the kind of attraction that he ought to have. Not just because he's married, right? Which he thinks about, again, a lot to kind of keep himself on the straight and narrow, to keep himself stabilized, keep himself on the path, on the goal. Beyond that, also, because this Tavira, this admiral, is, first of all, an ex-Imperial, second of all, a pirate, and third of all, the pirate that Rogue Squadron has been going after and chasing now for several years, and was, in some sense, the reason that he and Mirax were having trouble deciding whether to have children, because he was using the pursuit of Tavira and her pirates as a stalling tactic to say, well, we'll talk about having kids after we've finished this mission, after we've dealt with Tavira, after we've dealt with these Invid pirates that she leads. And so she is already a kind of personal nemesis of his, and so his attraction to her, he recognizes there's something wrong with it from the outset. So he cannot just give into this. And he recognizes as well that complicates matters further. He recognizes as well that if he were to give into it, that it would not just be a kind of detached action for the result of helping Mirax. He would be giving in to his undue and disordered attractions. It couldn't just be he is, separating himself from his actions, he's separating his goals from his present moment, or he couldn't maintain a kind of distance from it. It really would be him giving in to this wrong temptation. He tries to rationalize this even as well. And he brings up his past with Corsac, with Corellian security, as a police officer, basically. Where he says, Tavira had given me a month to decide if I would become her consort. I would be taken on board the Invidious. I would become part of the crew. I would have her confidence. I'd be able to learn all of the Invid's secrets, and I would even learn where Mirax was held. I would have everything I wanted, my wife back, and the means to destroy the Invids. Now, he says, in other undercover operations I'd worked before, the delicate matter of physical intimacy with subjects of the investigation had come up, and had been handled in a variety of ways. Sometimes another Corsac member, like Iella, his old partner, would be brought in to play the role of wife or girlfriend. In other times, when going out with a gang and being paired off with someone in the group, getting them drunk enough to incapacitate them or feigning being that drunk myself provided a way out. Yet other times, claiming to have a girlfriend who knew nothing of my criminal activity would be enough to get folks to leave me alone. But there were occasions where a cover story did not suffice. All operatives were told that they needn't do anything they objected to on a moral or philosophical basis, and were given assignments that would put the least amount of stress upon us in that regard. But there were times when sleeping with someone was the logical next step in deepening a relationship that would allow the investigation to go further. So, he starts thinking about things in these ways as if he's back to being an undercover cop with this group of criminals. And thinking, well, this is for the investigation. I'm doing what I need to do here. But he's stopped, of course, by two factors. One, like I said before, he recognizes that he really does have an undue attraction to Tavira. And because of that undue attraction, it wouldn't be this distanced, clinical, professional kind of deception. It would really be giving in to something that he knows he shouldn't give into. And what that knows he shouldn't give into is adultery. It's betraying his love for his wife, and all the more so, betraying the entire purpose of why he's getting into this in the first place. He goes on a couple of pages later throughout more of this dilemma. He says, I would have swept Tavira away. Not in the, swept her off her feet sense, but, wiped her out, defeated her. I would have won Mirax her freedom, but only at the expense of all we had ever had together. So because the whole point of this undercover operation, all of this, was for the sake of finding and rescuing Mirax, the love of his life, his wife, he's pursuing all of this for the end of his marriage. And his wife in that marriage, and rescuing her and her safety and her well-being and the love that they share. And so, if in order to accomplish that end, he does something that is inimical to that end, if he betrays her as a way to save her, if he betrays their marriage by committing adultery with the woman who kidnapped her in order to save her, he wouldn't wind up saving his marriage. He wouldn't wind up saving his wife, qua married partner. Sure, he might be able to rescue Mirax, but it undermines the very reasons that he had for doing all of this in the first place. And so this is what I tell my students a lot when we're talking about natural law ethics. If you find that in the course of planning out your action, you find that there is a contradiction somewhere, usually between ends and means. If the end you're pursuing is contradicted by the means you have to pursue it, or perhaps the reason you have for doing something is contradicted by the kind of action that you're doing, then that is a good indicator that the kind of action that you're doing and the reasons you have for it are intrinsically wrong. And in this case, Corran realizes this before it's too late. And so he goes another route. He manages to defeat her otherwise, defeat all of her lackeys. Eventually, ultimately with the help of Luke Skywalker, because Luke's the big damn hero of the Star Wars universe, he manages to succeed without going too far in the wrong direction. But again, I think it's fascinating to see how he comes to this realization, and to see, first of all, how difficult it was. Right? Because if we have a very, very important goal, it can be all too easy to overlook important ethical considerations of how to get there. The end can start looking like it justifies the means, even if those means wind up contradicting the end. And then further, it gives us a fascinating case study into the ethics of undercover work and deception for a good purpose, for a good cause. And it helps us to find where the limits might be of that kind of work, right? If what we are doing in order to accomplish a goal winds up undermining the very purposes of that goal, we've gone off the rails somewhere. to point out on another to emphasize another point that's brought up a lot in this book that I've talked about a couple of videos ago. Corran is often concerned about not being able to recognize himself for who he is. He doesn't recognize the man he sees in the mirror. He doesn't recognize his actions as actions that he would do. And if you get to that point, again, red flags should start going up. So, again, this is partially in response to a criticism of Stackpole's writing as just being a little bit too horny, which, okay, but in part as well, it's looking at what I think is a really interesting ethical dilemma that Corran Horn faces and overcomes in a good way. So again, this is one more element of this book that I absolutely love. It's really well put together. It's really well done. And it explores some very complex topics in a really careful way. So once again, if you haven't read it, at the end of all these, like, why haven't you? What's wrong with you? Just find it, read it, among a bunch of other Star Wars EU books that I'll recommend as well. Anyway, thank you all again for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this look at an interesting and complex topic. And I also hope that you're enjoying these Star Wars videos as well. Star Wars has always been a love of mine. The EU has always been a love of mine. And I'm just thrilled to be able to share that with all of you. So, anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one.